I am currently politically homeless after a lifetime in the Labour movement. I know I'm not alone, and I wanted to share my journey campaigning within Labour and share the cross-party alliances I made on the way. I'd be interested to see if there are others in the same boat and look at the way forward. So if you could please fill in the poll, it'll just give us a bit of an idea. How can we have any influence in a system that ignores and silences our voices? And if the polls are to be believed, Labour may well be the next government. So what will we be asking of them? As for voting, is there any point in spoiling your ballot? Lynn will take you through the pros and cons of the various parties, but so anyway, I'm from a very political family. My granny was a founder member of the Communist Party and one of the first female Labour councillors. My dad was a Labour councillor and then later joined the Communist Party. And I was in the Young Communist League when I was 14. I'm 67, so that's a lifetime in left-wing politics. Through student politics, the peace movement and the women's movement, I've always been active doing whatever I can to make sure that we have a future based on equality and fairness for all, especially women. I've been in and out of the Labour Party. I left once over Clause 4 and I left again over Iraq, but I rejoined when Jeremy Corbyn appeared to be giving us a socialist vision, which inspired some hope in me. And I'm going to start this journey at 2018 when I was part of my local constituency party and all women shortlists were the issue. Suddenly they were open to self-ID, and trying to argue that I thought would be quite simple. Just literally point out that this wouldn't work and ask for clarification about what it meant, look in the rule book, and that's when you discover sex and gender are used indiscriminately and in all the way through. It's an absolute mess. And that's when the silencing began. I was up against a trans-identified male who had his story to share at one of our meetings of his own transition, and the Be Kind Brigade around the table gave him 3/4 of the meeting to describe in detail his operation. The rest of us had 15 minutes to talk him down, and I spoke out very firmly. And that's the day I lost my local tribe. He's been trolling me ever since. He accuses me of having authored the Labour Transphobes Declaration, which is ridiculous, but it was a really, the Jaws music almost happened in the room that day. I could feel that this place where I'd previously felt totally at home had changed irrevocably. So I found Labour women having the same experience via Zoom, at conference and online. And in 2019, we formed the Labour Women's Declaration, which is a signatory to this group. And of course, by then, WDI had done their declaration. So, you know, we were aware of the power of doing those. And all we agreed with in that group, Labour is a very broad church, were the 7 points of the declaration, which you can see on screen. They mirror very much what there is in the WDI declaration, but also, you know, some of them are Labour specific. Now, the comments that came on those petitions, that's what I think the power is, because it proves we're not in a minority. These are the sorts of things that are still being written this month on that petition. And I love the third one there. Thank goodness I found you. We need more feminists to shout about this and prevent the right wing from claiming the moral high ground. These will be available for the talk afterwards, because there's not really that much time to read them. Anyway, I believe in networking. So since this kind of snowball effect of declarations and petitions had got going, I reached out to other parties. And that's when I met the amazing Karen Varley in 2020, who was doing the same with Conservative women. And together we launched Women Uniting. And the aim was to reach women who were not in political parties, because the issue of only talking to women that are already political, you know, was needed addressed. And again, this petition is still getting signatures, even though we have stepped away from this organisation. It's still up there online. The next one, please, Bernadette. This was what we actually called for. And if you think it was written yesterday, it was launched at the first Let Women Speak from the ladder in Hyde Park on International Women's Day 2020. We call upon the government, specifically the Right Honourable Elizabeth Liz Truss MP, Minister for Women and Equalities, to commit to the following: clarify and enshrine in law the legal definitions of woman and sex in order to make current legislation clear and unambiguous, and ensure data used to inform government policies correctly recorded. 2, publish guidance explaining and enforcing the single-sex exemptions in the Equality Act 2010. A new statutory code of practice must help everyone be clear on what single-sex means, as recommended by the Women and Equality Select Committee in July 2019. And 3, ensure all new laws, amendments and policies are assessed for their impact on 51% of the population, e.g. women and girls. So as you can see, it's not rocket science, is it? And we've been saying it since in lots of different ways. Part of the ask at the moment is to clarify the Equality Act. We're still getting signatures, even though we've closed that down. And I think it gives voice. You know, if people stumble upon these things online, they get to speak without being silenced by the TRAs. Anyway, we also linked up lots of women's organisations through a Facebook group and found other political women's pledge groups. So Lib Dems, the Greens, the WEP and the Communist Party. For a while, we had monthly meetings. And from that, there was a parliamentary group that grew, which still operates in the corridors of power, arranging briefings, cross-party briefings to friendly MPs and Lords, those in the Lords. And that excellent work is, I have to say, largely steered by Karen Varley. So thank you for that, Karen. What we found in the other parties is it was the same battles, but different methods: suspensions, targeting, expulsions, gerrymandering, anything to silence women speaking out on these issues. And it was a very odd feeling working across tribal lines. Your old beliefs were being challenged. Now, back in Labour Women's Declaration, I was a tenacious letter writer. That was partly my job, following up correspondence, to which there was never an answer. But David Evans, the General Secretary, had been sent a portfolio about how women in the Labour Party had been targeted. And it was growing all the time. He hadn't even read the one we sent. I was angry at the no debate idea that was coming across to us, and decided that after a sub-meeting at a Labour Women's Declaration gathering in 2020, there was a group of lesbians in one corner, a group of trade unionists in another, a group of councillors in another. And we decided perhaps if we had lesbian Labour, the LGBTQ XYZ door is always open. So we might be able to walk through that door and take with us the arguments about women's sex-based rights. In April 2021, we launched, we'd been forming it for a while, Lesbian Labour. And it was absolutely ridiculous to discover that we had even less of an entry because there was we asked to be friends of the Labour Party, no friend status was granted. LGBT Labour were against us from the minute we joined, and we did ask them to work with us. They wrote back and said, we will not work with you because you represent a negligible proportion of lesbians. So the battle was on then to prove that actually we are not a few, that we are many. And it's been an uphill battle. The need for more lesbians led me to use the same rationale as with Women Uniting. So we started Lesbian Fight Back in December 2021. And partly because I was receiving a lot of hostility from lesbians who had previously been Labour and were angry with the Labour Party. And we needed a Labour voice to counter LGBT Labour. So at that point, I was being investigated by the Labour Party, as I expected to be, for anti-Semitism and hostility to gender reassignment. And that was for letting them know who the funders were of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, an email I'd written in 2018, to which I've never received a reply. But there we go. And since I was under investigation, I was unable to stand as a local councillor. So that's the sort of shenanigans that was going on. I knew it would come to my door eventually. So 2022, LWD were refused a stall at conference, and we campaigned outside. 2023, while I was on tour with Tonya Gievjon for the Lesbian Not Criminal tour, I was speaking as Lesbian Labour, and I was actually booed, which told me everything I needed to know. Labour were losing women, Labour were losing lesbians. So shortly after that, Labour dropped the self-ID. We thought there was a bit of hope. And the next conference, we were inside. LWD actually got inside and had a proper meeting, and Lesbian Labour had a fringe meeting, because by this time I was working with Gay Men's Network and the LGB Alliance to make sure that there was a voice coming from there. Now that was such an awful atmosphere at that conference. I cried all the way home. I was attacked verbally by Angela Regal in front of everybody at the reception on the first night of the women's conference. I went to shake hands with her and I said, "Hello, I'm Paula Boulton from Lesbian Labour." She leapt back and said, "I'm not going to speak to you. I don't agree with you," etc., etc. And I was handled off the stage by handlers, and there's been no, despite their assurances, there's been no apology since. Anyway, basically in Labour, LGBT Labour have got it sewn up. There is only one type of lesbian, and that's the Angela Regals of this world. Joanna Cherry is fighting a losing battle in there, in Parliament, trying to say that there are many of us. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And with all of the shenanigans going on backstage, and then finally Gaza, I left the Labour Party. I've continued to work with Lesbian Labour because we represent the wider Labour movement. And there's been things like meeting Victor Borlos Madrigal about the SOGI issue at the UN. We've met Lloyd Russell Moyle to try and argue about conversion therapy. One of the parliamentary briefings we had was for lesbians, and spoke to Reem Al Salem about violence against women and girls, particularly lesbians, and carried on growing the Lesbian Fight Back group, which has now got 25 different lesbian organisations working together with about 47 lesbians. A declaration last Friday, and we got to 968 signatures before change.org took it down. So we're still challenging them on that. But it does prove the numbers. And I'd just like to say, where are we now? These are some of the things that lesbians are telling us. We know it because we know what we are and what's going on. But there've been all the recent wins. There've been the investigations into Stonewall, the Tavistock, WPATH. The Tories had finally got it right and were well briefed on puberty blockers, the Cass report, NHS guidance, schools guidance and safeguarding. And then there was the rumble about a snap election. Well, you know you're in a political quandary when you hope that the party you fought against all your life are given a few more months to get things nailed down. Now, ironically, on the day the election was announced, we'd just managed as Lesbian Labour to finally secure meetings with Wes Streeting to talk about Cass, Bridget Phillipson to talk about education, and Annalise Dodds to talk about hate crime, conversion practice and the Equality Act 2010. So there's work to be done. And Lesbian Labour will continue to do that. Whoever gets in, and as I say, polls predict it is going to be Labour. Lesbian Labour have just put these demands out: reaffirm the meanings of sex and sexual orientation. And I have to say to any of the women's groups, when you're arguing for the clarification of sex, please mention the third protected characteristic of sexual orientation. It's not just a clash between sex and gender reassignment, it's that third one as well. We definitely need to separate sexual orientation and gender identity, and our right to gather and have same-sex spaces and provisions needs to be protected. It's not even talked about. Protecting young lesbians from gender ideology, because we know from the Cass report, we knew anyway, but Cass has proved it, that the majority of those girls being referred are in fact left to their own devices, would be lesbians when they grew up. And fully implement the recommendations of the Cass review. As you'll have seen from the manifesto, they think they can implement Cass and have conversion therapy, no loopholes. So how on earth do you progress as somebody that's politically homeless? Like me, you can get on board with any of the parties and help with all the lobbying. There's always help needed: admin help, letter writing. There's boring stuff in the background. I know Vols Online endlessly doing lists of who to send things out to. You know, I mean, it's like watching paint dry, but lobbying needs to happen. You can spoil your ballot. Apparently, as long as you write none, it does work. In Derby, they show the spoiled ballots on a big screen. So if you do want to protest, check with your returning officer what they do, because it might well be a chance. Although yesterday I spoke to some people who sit in the booth, you know, guarding the booths all day, and they said it's pointless. It just makes more work for the tellers. Nobody reads them, nobody notices, but it is, you know, a point. Strategic voting, wherever you are. Obviously, there's now the Party of Women. So if for you the key message is the women's message, and there's nothing to lose in your constituency, help out, get that message heard, and let's make sure we get Rosie Duffield back in, and Tonia Antoniazzi, Joanna Cherry, Neil Hanvey, whatever anybody can do to make sure that there's at least a voice in Parliament speaking for us. So any gender critical MPs that you can find anywhere, and don't trust anybody who has not grasped the nettle and spoken the truth about women's issues, because if they can lie about this, they can lie about anything. And there's others who would say, as any good socialist would have done back in the day, you vote holistically and you put your own thing back down the agenda. If Labour is right for the economy, despite them being wrong for women, vote Labour. I don't know what I'm going to do. And actually, I'm doing a postal ballot for the first time ever, because I'll be camping with a load of women at the reinvigorated Women in Tune Festival on the day of the election. The other thing I just would warn you about is the Chris Smith list, which is a list that LGBT Labour have put together, and you can look it up online. Those MPs have signed a pledge from LGBT Labour, basically the opposite of what's on screen at the moment. We put this little video together. This is what we're telling Labour at the moment.
So I was a member of the Labour Party until something tipped me over the edge.
I'm currently politically homeless after a lifetime of supporting the Labour Party.
I'm a lifelong Labour voter, but I intend to vote Conservative at this election because I do not trust Keir Starmer.
Labour has collectively failed us.
People are trying to redefine what it means to be gay and lesbian, and I want to make it clear. Same-sex sexual orientation exists, and it isn't about gender.
In a world of gender, homosexuality will lose its meaning.
We're called bigots and sexual racists by you and other organisations that you support. How dare you?
We are not homogeneral. You can't even say it.
How can Labour as a party stand up and say they're for lesbians and gay rights when they tacitly endorse our sterilisation?
I fear for young lesbians. I don't want them to experience homophobia or to be told they can change their sex.
You know, if I was 7 years old now, they'd be dropping down the gender beneath.
This whole gender thing is an absolute assault on the reality of sex, on our sexual orientation, on lesbians, on gays, on our language that we have to describe ourselves as a sexual minority.
It's a tyranny of a group of people who have nothing to do with traditional Labour values.
Labour will need to convince me that the rights of women, LGBT people and children will be protected under a future Labour government as opposed to decimated.
No X for me until you respect my same-sex attraction.
And we will go to other parties if we absolutely have to.
Let's all encourage Labour to be braver.